All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to be back with you this week. Welcome back to this class. Just as a reminder for those of you that this might be your first time in this particular sequence, over a 6-week period of time, we have been talking through some community challenge issues as we as a body can consider how we might want to serve uniquely in the future in the North Oklahoma City, Edmond area. So we've talked about substance abuse, we've talked about homelessness. Last week, Rachel Holt was here with my wife, and they talked about at-risk youth. Today, we are going to talk about criminal justice-involved populations. So you will see Ryan, the DA, today, and not Ryan, the Bible class coordinator. And then next week, we'll be talking about mental illness. And the last week of the series, we'll be talking about domestic violence. And just talking through those areas broadly, trying to understand how we might more effectively serve within this community. So, Ryan, it feels like a natural. You've been a DA for a number of years, and as I was thinking about who might be in a position to talk to us about criminal justice-involved populations, you've seen a lot as a DA.
I've seen my fair share, yes.
Yeah. So just as a way of reacquaintance, and he and I are going to do this more as mutual content experts today, as opposed to what has been an interviewer-interviewee style. Why don't you share a little bit about your trajectory as it relates to criminal justice populations? Then I'll talk a little bit about mine, and then we'll walk through some conversation points.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. For purposes of what we're going to be talking about today, I thought I'd kind of walk through the different areas or the divisions that I have worked at in the district attorney's office. And I've been working in the district attorney's office since 2011, so roughly 12 years now. The reason I want to kind of walk through that is because we're going to hit back on some of the different areas as we go about our conversation. But anytime, at least in Oklahoma County, anytime a new graduate from law school comes into the district attorney's office, they spend the first year in their office on misdemeanor crimes. And misdemeanor crimes run a wide gamut, but effectively they are crimes that carry up to 1 year in the county jail. Nothing for more than a year would be considered a misdemeanor. Now that does cover a whole gamut of things. That's anything from simple drug possession to your first-time DUIs to your first-time domestic violence and various other things. From there, I was on a what would you call a lesser property crimes and a drug docket for about 2 or 3 years after that. Before moving to major crimes, violent felonies, major burglaries, robberies, that kind of thing, up until about 2015. And in 2015, I joined our SVU team, which is our crimes against children and sex-based crimes. I was there for about 5 years before I went all the way back to the beginning and became the supervisor of the misdemeanor team, before then ultimately working my way up to the head of our major crimes division, and then ultimately under Mr. Prater, the previous DA, I was his chief of criminal during his last year in the term, and that was just kind of an overseer role, and that's when we got to those roles is when we started doing, well, all along the way you would do homicide cases, but that's when we started doing capital death offenses. In the last year, with the election at the end of last year, my buddy, actually in a strange turn of fate, was appointed by the governor as district attorney in Shawnee, and asked a number of us that were with him in Oklahoma County to follow him over there. And so I accepted that offer and went with him. I'm his chief of criminal now. And doing a lot of the same stuff, but now I also deal with domestic violence cases, something I hadn't before, and our drug court out there. And so kind of rounded out some areas that I had never practiced out in Oklahoma County. But I hope that's what you were asking for, and that kind of runs through what my areas of focus have been.
Right. And so as Ryan is on that side, my career as it relates to human services, mental health, addiction space, I first became involved in criminal justice work my first stint with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, as we advanced policy to take the pressure off of DAs, if you will. We began to work on programs such as you might hear about, crisis intervention teams, programs of assertive community treatment, all of these jail diversion models and prison diversion models that we try to put in place with the state. So my work throughout that time has now been on the other side of the equation, trying to keep people out of the DA's office, or if they end up in the DA's office, with some latitude for perhaps an outcome that looks very different than time in a state prison. Most recently, in what I have described to some of you who talked about it, which might be the which might be the dumbest career move I have ever made. I recently went on the trust of the Oklahoma County Jail, which for those of you that follow the news around the challenges for Oklahoma County Jail, you know that it is, and I'm not being overly dramatic, it has been a debacle. And we continue to work on that and continue to make our headway. So I have seen this as somebody trying to take pressure off the system, and I now see it in the context of having to work with about 1,500 individuals on a given day who are in the custody of the detention center. And so we see that, and it'll be from those two lenses that I think we walk through this conversation this morning. So you're gonna see a protector of the public, which I think is what the DA's role looks like, and you're gonna see from my lens, you're gonna see somebody who understands that protection of the public is incredibly important, but is looking for ways to take some of that pressure and help people find different paths. So that's kind of the context we'll both use as we walk through these questions. And again, our purpose today is to help understand some of the dynamics of these populations that exist in our community. And so, Ryan, I think the first question we wanted to talk about, you see a lot of case jackets come across your desk. You interview a lot of people, you interview a lot of their legal representation. What are some of the common threads that you see when you think about populations that have become entangled within the criminal justice population?
And in looking at a question like that, for purposes of us having 35 to 40 minutes to talk about this morning, typically what I would split it down into is we see people that fall into three different categories. To quote Batman, there is a group of people that just want to see the world burn, right? And I mean, there are people out there that are just dangerous individuals. I don't anticipate that's who we're going to be talking about much this morning, because frankly, that is a minority. There are just inherently bad people out there, but fortunately for us, we don't have to deal with that too very often. The vast majority of people we run into fall into two categories. Just the ones that have gotten so far down a road that there's no, at least in their mind, there is no coming back. This is their way of life now. I mean, frankly, what we're doing right here would be a completely alien experience for them because they have fallen so far down that road. And then there's the people that are the kind of ones that are in between, the ones that are committing, or that we see committing crimes, that we see hurting people, that we see going into houses, things like that, because of where they have ended up in that previous cycle. We've talked about it in this auditorium already over the past couple of weeks, but I mean, addiction is a terrible, terrible thing, and it leads people to do terrible, terrible things. And so when you're talking about the vast majority of people that we get those case files coming across our desk, it's individuals that we're seeing, most of them are there to feed a habit. Most of them are there because of their habit. And the question ultimately becomes, certainly in drug cases, and many times in property cases too, the question becomes, well, what do you do to these people, or what do you do with these people that, one, protects society, but two, also tries to protect this person, or give this person the means so that this won't happen again. So as far as common trends, common threads that I see, I would generally, with room for exceptions, kind of split people up into those three categories that we see on average.
I can't recall the statistic, but I know it's an overwhelming number. You mentioned the threat of addiction and substance use. Is, is it accurate that that's somewhere 3/4 of the prosecutions that hit your desk, there is a linkage to substance use? Is that the general number that still applies?
That sounds right, and frankly, if I was going to guess one way or the other, I would say that's low. It's just, so one of the examples I go to and I'm not sitting here trying to make any argument for or against marijuana, but when people would bring up the argument that marijuana is a victimless crime, there was always a case I went back to. It happened in 2014. And when this woman started, she could have been, frankly, anyone that I see here today. She was a mother of two, came from middle-class family. They had a middle-class family. She got hurt in some way. I can't remember what. Started off with minor pain pills. Those got out of control, switched over to recreational marijuana use, which very quickly opened the door to a number of other things. And in the span of 9 months, she went from happy mother of two, happy family, to a husband like trying to find his kids at some of the shady downtown hotels off of I-35 because she's completely unrecognizable. That story ends very sadly for her, but the most horrifying thing about it was that's just how fast that stuff grabs onto people and how fast it becomes a need for them. And I mean, it truly is terrifying about how quick it can grab people. You know, I talked about a few moments ago that there are some bad people out there. I just went to a conference down in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, and it's a conference aimed at crimes against children, but one of the things I went to that was scarier than most of like what you would anticipate that conference would be about, it was talking about the people who are developing these drugs. And it was talking about how you have to come to grips with the fact that some of them just plain are evil, in that they know they can stay ahead of legislators in terms of what is illegal as far as drugs are concerned. They know that when laws get passed, they have to lay out, this is the illegal substance and this is the chemical compound that makes up this illegal substance. And then there are people out there who know that there is such a market for these things, and they know that there are people who need these substances, and they also are smart enough to know, all I have to do is change this chemical compound a little bit, and it's no longer an illegal substance. And I mean, there is a vast market for that. The officer that taught that course built up to it, and he was good at being dramatic, but the most horrifying thing he showed is he talked to us about a drug for a good 10 minutes, and then he showed us different body cams of him being able to get different drugs along the way. And for this one, he showed us, I think it was in Minnesota, he walked into a Walgreens, went over to where they had like the 5-hour energy, and just picked it up from the display case that was right next to it, because I mean, it was being sold in convenience stores. And so you have a group of people who can so quickly become addicted to these things and then need these things, which become very readily available to them, so that the only question is, how do I get it? Do I steal it, or do I have the money for it? And how do I get the money for it when that money runs out?
Yeah, what he's talking about, it's really an interesting observation to pull the statute that defines what illegal substances are in Oklahoma, because he's exactly right. All you have to do is mess with the molecule. It may be the binding agent. It may be the coating on top of the tablet. All you have to do is mess with the molecule, and if statute doesn't specifically articulate the elements of the substance, he would not be able to prosecute. And so there was a lot of frustration, especially as fentanyl began to emerge, that the legislature had not contemplated specific chemical names, and there was the inability to be able to prosecute. I mean, it's an interesting scenario. Ryan, a question we didn't talk about, but as you were walking through that, we talked about some of the common threads. At least from a popular standpoint, there is, and anecdotally, there is a lot of conversation about individuals who become criminal justice involved related to their gang involvement. What do you see in terms of prosecutions and organized gang involvement with individuals who cross your desk?
Well, obviously, it's not as you don't hear about it as much in Oklahoma City as you do in Dallas, Chicago, those kind of places. But if you don't think there's a gang population here, you're sorely mistaken. We've got plenty of them. Unfortunately, the crossroads of I-35 and I-40 are a great area for everyone to travel, but they're also a melting pot of people coming across the country, both north, south, and east, west. In terms of that, the worst thing about gangs is that they, at least what we have seen, is that they offer the same thing that we hope to offer here as a church body, in that they offer a safe haven. They offer a place for people to be part of a group. Nobody goes into a gang because, well, I say that, with exception, nobody goes into a gang because they are committing crimes or because they want to go get a felony rap sheet or anything like that. They do it because it is a group of people where they can fit in. It's a group of people that they have a system for breaking in. One of the terms for getting into a gang, there are recruits, and then there's actually breaking into it, the acts that actually get you in there. But they make it something that is desired by this group, and they're very, very good with their recruiters. One of the things Steve and I talked about, I did a death penalty case either last March or 2 Marches ago. And the defendant represented himself, which just in general is a terrible idea. But throughout it, I was shocked because, again, still a bad idea. An attorney needs to be representing him. But Derek was smart. And more than that, he was a little bit charming. He was witty, because we had to interact with him during this, which was a super awkward situation, at least at first, in that we are actively seeking the death penalty on this individual, but at the same time, we have to figure out how to work with him during this trial. But he could understand us. We could go back and forth. He would make jokes with us. And, as being what I believe my job is, I tried to treat him with respect, and with that being how he was, we would joke around at times, professionally joke around, whatever that means. But the most horrifying thing is, as I sat there afterwards, was thinking about Derek was intelligent, and Derek was able to put this stuff together. Derek got a horrible lot. Derek got a horrible turn of the cards. Like, Derek very easily could have been a good member of society, could have been a desirable member of society. Now, that does not excuse the frankly horrible crimes that he committed, but it's a great example of an individual who because of those circumstances, because he got into that body early on rather than this body, or rather than one of the other hopeful ones or helpful ones, could have been a wildly different story.
Another one of the threads that I haven't seen the data point on, but so I'm speculating a little bit, but I would argue that poverty is a fairly decent thread or characteristic that might run in. So I'm going to put you on the spot here with a question that may be a little difficult to answer. You may choose not to hit it squarely, but when it relates to criminal justice involved populations, is justice availability the same to both of those who have means and those who not have means? Say that again.
No, it's not. Now, I do want to be careful how I answer that question. The legal system itself it treats people with or without means the same, in that it is the same procedure, it is the same, I mean, I can only speak for myself and the people that I work with, but we don't, when we look through a case and we are trying to make determinations as to what is the appropriate outcome for a case, we don't look at people's means or that kind of thing. And I mean, I can sit here and tell that straight to your face. Where it comes, excuse me, where it really starts to differentiate is because when you enter, well, let's just walk through a situation. When you enter the criminal court process, when an arrest is made and you are set for court, the first thing that happens is a bond gets set. And the purpose of that bond is to ensure you're returning to court. It is because pretty universally, again, there's exceptions to everything, but universally, people don't want to lose their money. And so what it is a amount of money set up that is kept on retainer by the court for you to be free, so that as long as you come to all your court settings, at the end of your case, you will get this money back. That is effectively what a bond is. It is a monetary promise that I'll return, because if I don't, I will lose however much I've put forth. Which, in theory, sounds like a good idea, right? We want to make sure people are coming to court. We want to make sure that people aren't on the loose, and it's well thought out as far as people don't want to lose their money. Where that divide comes is you have two people that have committed, we'll say you have two people that have committed the same crime, and say they get the exact same bond. One of those people is able to make that bond, one of them is not. The person who is able to make that bond gets out of jail. We'll even say that they end up with the same attorney. While they are out of jail, the way, I mean, we say the wheels of justice, they turn, but they turn pretty slowly. Nothing ever happens on the first setting. So you have a couple of different court dates, and those court dates are usually spread out by 3 weeks to 2 months at a time. And so in the beginning to an end of a case, usually you're looking at about 2 to 3 months for the quicker ones. So you have this individual who is able to bond out. He's living his life. He's, hopefully going to work. He's helping with his kids, getting to school. He is doing whatever on the outside. You take the other individual, the one who's not able to make that bond. He is sitting in the county jail awaiting these. And so every time there's a continuance of his case, he goes back to his cell where he is not helping his family, where he is not helping with the kids, where he is not, other than what is offered at the jail, any type of program that's offered at the jail, he is not getting any type of help. One, that can help just him in general, or two, that can be presented to me, the person looking at their cases later on, to say, hey, here's how serious he is about getting on the right track. And so all of a sudden, let's say that there's something that these individuals want to fight about this case, which is their constitutional right. There's nothing that says they have to take guilty pleas. The one on the outside, he has all the time in the world, right? He has time to get a trial set 6 months out and let his attorney do whatever and continue to get mitigation together to see if they can make my offer better. The one in the jail doesn't have that opportunity. And so all of a sudden, the question becomes, if he truly believes he's innocent, do I stay here in the county jail where I don't have a way out of? Do I stay here to ultimately fight this case? Or do I just accept what the DA's offering because that gets me out of here earlier? And yeah, maybe I have to say that I did something that I didn't. And maybe this means I'm going to be on probation for a little while, but it gets me out of here. And so again, that's a lot of hypotheticals all built into this one hypothetical, but that's very much what I mean when I say that the system is the same. How that system is traversed is very, very different based on means.
So a couple of thoughts based on what you just shared there, Ryan. First, one of the conceptions, and I am not stating this as a matter of advocacy. I'm stating this as a matter of practical fact. One of the things that frustrates the general population, I believe, is when somebody is incarcerated, whether it be at the jail or DOC or wherever, as it relates to medical and mental health care. What I would share with you is that the goal of medical, the goal of behavioral health in those settings is not a goal of improvement, it is a goal of maintenance. That is the functional objective of the medical staff, is to not let somebody to deteriorate, but it is not to help somebody progress. That's the stated goal. And so that creates unique in the scenario that you just described. But I'm going to move from what was your anecdotal, I'm going to move to a factual scenario that I know has played out, which was an individual who was arrested on a crime that carried with it a $500 bond. Ryan, a $500 bond tells you what about the crime?
It's nothing.
It's nothing. Not a public safety crime, probably a trespassing, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. $500 bond. This individual spent 168 days in the county jail on a $500 bond. The cost to detain somebody in the county jail is about $67. As a taxpayer, you started losing money on the 9th day of incarceration for this individual. Public defender, this is not criticism about public defenders, but this is how all of these topics come into play. The defense counsel chose not to pursue release on that $500 bond once it became obvious there weren't resources, because the priority became, we want this gentleman to stand for competency, because if he is deemed incompetent, we will get him mental health treatment. You get the rub of the scenario. This counsel was arguing for something that he thought this person could benefit from, and the only way he could achieve that was with incompetency and mandated treatment. And so it really does become a lot of scenarios that play out between the DA, the judges, the defenders, specifically when somebody can't find the resources for a $500 bond. So you've done drug court. You mentioned the fact that you've actively looked at drug court, you've seen it. So being in that challenge, you see a lot of people who, by the way, drug courts are wonderful, so thank you for participating in that. We are helping people use the carrot of having their criminal history wiped clean if they will engage in treatment. That's an overly simplistic definition. But even in drug court, I'm sure you see barriers to rehabilitation. I'm sure you get frustrated as you see that. So as you think about the population at large, and people, we know that a lot of them have drug-related crimes. The offense may be drug-related, or it was a drug addiction that fueled the offense. What are some of the barriers that you see when you think about the landscape of people who want to get better, lacking the supports to get there?
First off, I'm going to start with drug court for those of you who don't know what it is. Drug court is when you have, it's not just for drug crimes, and I'm going all the way back to what I kind of talked about at the beginning. We're talking about those property crimes, when people are stealing things to feed drug habits, behaviors that have come about because of drug habits. All of those are eligible for drug court. Typically, we try not to keep anyone, or we try not to offer it to individuals who have shown violent tendencies. We don't let any domestic abuse in there. Again, there's exceptions to everything, given however many circumstances, but in broad generalities, we don't let violence or anything with kids into drug court or mental health court for that reason, or for that matter. But the super good thing about drug court is exactly what Steve said. It is an opportunity for an individual to work their way out of this and walk away without whatever their current criminal cases are. Most drug court offers end with a dismissal if they are successfully to complete drug court. Now, the best part about drug court in comparison with other probationary matters is the fact that drug court anticipates that these people will fail for a time. And it's maybe the most simplistic best thing that ever happened with drug court was when someone, however long ago, put in that, just put it plainly, these people are never going to achieve this on their first try. They're never going to kick this habit on their first try. And so this system has to be set up with the mindset being that we are going to have to work them out of this. Whereas when you just have a simple probationary status, drug courses, testing clean, all of that might be terms of their probation, but that's more of a hard line in the sand. Drug court takes away that hard line in the sand and very much makes it where we are ready and waiting for you to mess up, and our first goal is to make you mess up less before we try to make you mess up not at all. So cannot speak enough about drug court, but at the end of the day, and I think I'm getting back to ultimately what your question was, you might have to ask it again here in a moment, but there are two factors there that go with drug court. One, you have to have an individual who is ready to do it, because it is a lot of work. Drug court is not an easy thing, or it's not supposed to be an easy thing anyway. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of resources. Fortunately, drug court is set up so that those resources aren't coming from the defendant, as most of the defendants don't have the resources to offer what drug court does. And so what it is a multidisciplinary team. You've got the DAs, you've got defense attorneys, you've got judges, but then you've also got representatives from your various drug resources. You have them from outpatient services, you have them from inpatient services, you have them from counseling, that are all there with the purpose of, we are going to try to make this person better. We are going to start them down that road. And so with drug court, we very much take away the idea that those resources aren't there, because they are going to be provided without cost to the defendant. That leads you back to what I was saying, in that you have to have an individual who's ready to step up and do that. Again, I don't mean by that someone who is ready to kick that habit on their first day or kick that addiction on their first day, but the one who's willing to put in that time. Oddly enough, the people that we see achieve in drug court has a direct correlation. At least I don't have any numbers to back this up, but what I have seen in what I have observed, the people who show up and are honest are the ones that end up making it. The ones that show up after having done it for 3 weeks and then come into drug court the next day and say, I messed up this week, I'm gonna test hot when we do our testing. Those are the ones who ultimately are going to make it, because they get it. They get the idea, like, I messed up, I need you, I don't have a chance unless you guys help me. And that's very much what we're trying to do in drug court. I feel like I've gone on a tangent about drug court.
Well, I'm gonna bring you back. Okay. I'm gonna bring you back to the question, because you just did an outstanding job of walking through what drug court looks like. And you also said, and I want to make sure that you caught what the DA said here. Drug court is not easy. It is not an easy program. In fact, it is so difficult that there are individuals, including their counsel, who will just say, take the felony conviction, because if it's a first-time possession, it may be probation. Take the conviction because it's easier than drug court.
And I'll go actually one up on that. At one point, it stopped getting offered to first-time individuals because of that very thing, because an individual looking at trying to not go to prison realizes that it will be easier, or their counsel has explained to them that it will be easier for them to meet the terms of their probation than to go through this whole process. And so oftentimes the pro-con, as far as the criminal court is concerned, comes when an individual is actually looking at Department of Correction time in prison, rather than doing the program. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's very much a risk-reward scenario at that point. Is I can have my life managed by this drug court for 24 months who are going to hawk on everything I do, or I can take my deferred or whatever it is as part of the probation. But here's the question I want to ask. So let's say that somebody is exiting the courtroom. They've either timed out of DOC, whatever it might be, and they're not working with under the auspices of a specialty court, don't have the access to the resources. What are the barriers out there that keep somebody who's criminally justice involved, whose addiction perhaps has not been met? What are their barriers to success as you see it?
Well, the first thing, and we've already touched on it a few times, the first thing that you can look to is who do they go back to? Mm-hmm. I mean, when you leave the courthouse, if your case is finished, where are you going? Are you going back to a family that you are going to start trying to get a job to try to provide for? Are you going back to an empty apartment where, idle hands, Are you going back to a group of individuals who were with you beforehand, who were doing the very things that that helped get you where you were in the first place? So right off the bat is the barrier that when a court case is finished, at least as far as the criminal court is concerned, it is a pat on the back and best of luck to you. And that when you're talking about hope of not hope of not recommitting crimes, that's somewhat a scary notion that you're leaving it up to just individuals on their own, individuals who have already shown that maybe they have trouble operating within the rules of civilization as they should. So yeah, I would say the first step is that these people don't always have a good base or support to start off with. But, and we've talked about it several times, cannot focus enough on that addiction is not something that is just kicked in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It is constantly there, and it lays low, and it can be distracted from, but there will come a time that it pops back up again, and the only way people are going to be successful is if they have somebody or something in place when it does so. Again, addiction is if not the biggest, it's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when you leave the criminal justice system to keep from getting right back into the criminal justice system.
Okay, I got about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions? If there are questions, I'll take. Stafford, Jim. I'll repeat the question, then Ryan, let you have a go at this. The question is, as it relates to some of the disparities in the ability to meet bail, to be able to bond out, to be able to back in the community with your family, what's a strategy that could be employed to help mitigate that as it relates to people's access to living externally of an incarcerated community?
Well, first off, I'll tell you that if there was an easy answer to that, it would have been suggested by now. I think and I don't have a good answer for you. I think where people, because obviously I've seen the news, I've seen people rant on it before, and I get it, because the way I just described it, it sounds unfair, right? The scenario I just played out sounds unfair. The court system, for better or worse, is set up with certain areas that don't take outside facts into consideration. And I would say that currently bail is set up that way. It is made where it is the same system across the board, for better or worse, so that it can't be accused of of being differentiating based on people's means or based on race or based on any number of things that divide us. If it is set across the board, or if there is a system in place that says here is what this thing is going to be, and it is a hardline rule, then you can never be accused of catering to one side or the other. But unfortunately, that's where we see situations like what we're talking about. So that's a long way of saying I don't have a good answer. I can sit here and describe how that process works to you, but frankly, if I had a good answer, you guys would have heard about it from me by now.
We got one more, and then I think we've got to wrap class. We're on
Just,
1
just
minute.
real, just real quick. Why does the whole system appear to take so long? Just, you mentioned how many days they were in jail, and just we were in Dubai doing mission work for a while, and made a point to saying it took 30 days. That was the deal. You charged and found innocent or guilty. So it appears to be that like a long time, but is that fact?
So it can be, and his question was, why does it take so long? And here's the thing, as I've said multiple times today, there's exceptions to everything. There are people that get arrested, they get charged, and then on their very first setting, they are agreeable to whatever our offer is, and boom, that's taken care of. But for the people who, because the way it typically works is the state of Oklahoma, myself, I'll make an offer on a case. Here's the crime that this defendant committed. I have looked through his case, I have looked through his background, and here is the offer I'm going to make. Say I'm 5 years supervised. First thing that defense attorneys know is if they're working, hopefully, with someone who will work with them, I'm not set in stone on that. That is where I'm starting with my, we use the term negotiation. I don't like that because we're talking about what's happening with people's lives, but that's where I'm starting with my offer. The first thing they're going to want to do is try to see if I'll offer less than that. And if they want to do that, again, hopefully they're working with someone who's doing the job right. The question I'm going to ask is, why should I offer less? Why should I come down on this offer? And that's when mitigation comes into play. And if somebody wants to show me, and we've been talking about drugs a lot this morning, if someone wants to show me that they're serious about their drug problem, the first thing they're going to do is enroll in these courses. And the first thing they're going to do is start showing me that they are testing negative week in and week out. And obviously that can't just happen right off the bat. And so, again, I don't like the term, but the negotiation of these cases is something that obviously lengthens it a little bit. More than that, you just have general docket management in these courthouses. I mean, where I currently work, it's Shawnee. We only have 2 judges that can cover the criminal dockets there. And if you don't get finished on whatever one of those docket days is, I mean, you're just looking at the population, and then that comes down to taxes, and nobody likes talking about that. Jim, to answer your question, there's a number of reasons that it lasts long. It doesn't have to, but if you want to see, a lot of times, if you're wanting to see positive outcomes, it takes a little bit of length.
Ryan, thank you. This was kind of fun to do it in this scenario, so I appreciate everybody's interest in the topic. Maybe we'll come back and do this again because we let a lot of ground uncovered. So, Ryan, thank you, and we will see you next week.
I appreciate it. It's nice to do this with a group of people who I at least think aren't going to be yelling at me at one point.